Well, good morning. I want to tell you today something about my time at the Juilliard School in New York. As you know, that's where I went, that's where I got my degrees. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about the time that I was there, a little bit about the school itself. The school itself, Juilliard, started really in the early 20th century. Around 1905, I think it was, there was an entity called the Institute of Musical Arts and another one called the Juilliard Graduate School. They merged and formed what was called the Juilliard School of Music. And that lasted by that official name until the late 1960s when it moved to Lincoln Center of the Performing Arts, that big art complex in New York City. And then the name was officially changed to simply the Juilliard School because there's a drama division there as well. It was always a school of about, I think, 800 or thereabouts students, so not a very large school. And as I remember in my time, the piano department was about 1/3 of the school. Now, as you may remember from an earlier talk that I did, when I started my piano lessons, they were originally in Philadelphia. I and my brother were excused from school half a day once a week to travel to Philadelphia for music lessons. Not only did I study piano, I also took violin lessons, and my brother took cello lessons, and we went as a family. My parents had their activities there as well. And I had mentioned this before. So it was always Philadelphia, and that went right through grade school and through most of high school. My father was always focused on Philadelphia as the place for me to have my lessons. I think that when he started thinking about New York and possibilities of Juilliard and, could I get into Juilliard or to make a connection there or whatever, and I think that happened in 1958 when I was a junior in high school. Because in that year, a rather momentous event took place in the music world. A young pianist, graduate of Juilliard several years earlier, from Texas, from a small town named Kilgore, Texas. His name was Van Cliburn. He went to Moscow and entered the International Tchaikovsky Piano Competition, which is a major competition in the music world. Every 4 years, there's piano, violin, and a vocal division. And he won the first prize, 1958. And this was a tense period in the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. And here was this young kid, all motherhood and apple pie, everything, coming to Moscow and wowing them all. He came back a huge hero. I mean, he had a ticker tape parade down Broadway. I mean, it was like Charles Lindbergh, flying across the Atlantic. It was a big, big occasion. I mean, can you imagine that? A classical musician getting a ticker tape parade down Broadway? It's never happened since then, but it did happen at that time. So there was a lot of interest, in what he had accomplished. Well, he was a graduate of Juilliard several years earlier, and his teacher was a lady named Rosina Lhevinne. She was the wife, widow at that time already, of a very famous pianist of that great age of virtuosity that I talked about earlier. His name was Joseph Lhevinne. He was born in 1873, the same year as Rachmaninoff, lived till 1944. And both of them were on the Juilliard faculty for quite a number of years. Well, after Van Cliburn won, Rosina Lhevinne's name really went up like that, and young pianists wanted to study with her. So it was around that time that my father, through some connection, arranged so that I would be able to play for her, have an audition with her. Now remember, we went up, my father, my mother went along, and my then girlfriend, she'd been a piano student of my father's, we all went up, to her apartment in New York, and I had that audition. I don't remember now what I played exactly. I do remember that there was another lady there in the room, somebody visiting, Rosina Lhevinne, and I remember I played whatever I played, and then she asked me some musical question, like what would you do here and here in something, and I answered thinking I was giving a good answer. I said, well, if in the printed score it says crescendo, play louder, you make it louder. If it says diminuendo, play softer. I thought I was just giving you the right answers. And I remember her turning to her friend and saying in French, "Il ne comprend pas la musique." He doesn't understand music. Now, of course, at that time, I didn't know what she was really talking about or what it meant. But later on, through study, I then realized what this meant. That markings on the printed page are simply a guideline, but when you learn performance practice, music history, style, and things like that, it's a kind of reading between the lines that makes for a good interpretation. Well, I didn't know that. I was just giving her a literal answer, well, whatever I played, I must have played well enough because she accepted me as a student. Now, I was still in high school then, so I started to go up on Saturdays to take private lessons with her and her assistant, because most everyone who studied with her, and by the way, we all referred to her as Madame Lhevinne. That was the way we all referred to her. So she had two assistants who had been her former students. There was a man named Martin Kanan and another one named Janine Dowers. I was with Janine Dowers. So I worked with her, and I had lessons with Madame Lhevinne every couple of weeks. And so I would go up on Saturdays to Juilliard, the preparatory division, and I also took a theory class at that time. So that went on, through my high school years, the remaining years. Then came time, of course, to do the official audition. Anyone who comes to Juilliard has to do an audition. And by the way, I should make mention that the standards at Juilliard are very high. I read not too long ago that only 8% of people who apply get admitted, So it's very competitive. I think the odds are even maybe more than schools like Harvard or Stanford, insofar as the percentage of students who apply to get in. It's that kind of standard there. Well, I remember when I took the official audition, there was, of course, a faculty panel there, to evaluate me. She wasn't part of the faculty, but I remember her sitting in the balcony all by herself, just observing and watching, So she especially came to hear me, but she was not part of the official committee that was going to evaluate me. Well, obviously, I was accepted, and I also got scholarships too, which was nice. I actually had all my costs at Juilliard covered. I had scholarships from three sources. I got a Juilliard scholarship, I got a New Jersey State scholarship, and I got something from a trust fund at one of the local banks in my hometown of Toms River, New Jersey. Now, so then after graduating from high school, I actually started studying in Juilliard. I was, of course, every music student who goes to any music school also takes other music courses. You don't just study your instrument. This is part of forming you as a musician, which is obviously the proper thing to do. So, you take theory courses and music history and other related courses which round you out. Now, Juilliard had a kind of a unique course that it was a little more than just theory. There were more elements in it, and it was called Literatures and Materials of Music, what we called L&M. I was placed 1 year ahead. That was because I'd had those theory classes in the preparatory division. So there was some kind of an evaluation test as to how much theory I knew, and I was placed 1 year ahead, in that L&M class. And of course, I took other courses: music history, some ensemble, chamber music things, and so on. And I was also fortunate in that I had, cost-wise, in that I had an aunt that lived within walking distance of Juilliard. Now, Juilliard was at that time, I should say, was located in Upper Manhattan. It was sort of corner of Broadway and 122nd Street. Those of you who know New York City would know what I'm talking about. And parallel to Broadway on the western side was Claremont Avenue. And that's where Madame Lhevinne lived. Her apartment, I remember, number 185 Claremont Avenue is where she had a ground floor apartment. So just down the street from Juilliard. That's what Juilliard building was when I went there. Now, when they moved to Lincoln Center in around 1968 or 7 or thereabouts, of course, another school took over. Another excellent music school in the city is now in the old Juilliard, the Manhattan School of Music. They're located now where I was. But that's where I went. Now, my aunt lived at 103rd Riverside, so I could walk to Juilliard in about 15 or 20 minutes, or I could go to 103rd Street to the subway there and it's 2 stops, 110th Street and then 122nd, and there was Juilliard right there. Now, the building was located such that across Broadway was Columbia University. If you looked across 122nd Street was the Union Theological Seminary, which was it's a very important school, theological school. A little bit further down the block on Claremont was Riverside Church. Another view straight across to the west was Grant's Tomb, and you can see a little bit of New Jersey, my home state, on the other side. And if you went a little bit further north, now to about 125th Street and a little bit to the east, that's where Harlem was. That was the neighborhood of where Juilliard was. So like I say, I either walked or I took the subway, and I took my classes and my lessons. I remember that Madame Rosina's studio was room 412. But sometimes the lessons were in her apartment down on Claremont Avenue. So she would be propped up in her bedroom, and us students would just play in the living room. I should say that she was already in her 80s at that time. She was already an elderly lady. She was, but still very sharp. She never shouted. She never raised her voice. But boy, you had to be ready for your lessons when you went. You knew that you were you were being observed very, very carefully. So you really had to be prepared. She spoke mostly about musical things in interpretation. She left any of the technical things to those assistants, So I remember, always being told about how to produce a warm, nice tone, going deep into the keys on the piano to project the sound and that sort of thing. She represented at that time what was kind of referred to as the, quote, the Russian school of piano playing, which emphasized things like that. Also, the virtuoso side was just one side of things, but this interpretation, producing a wonderful, nice sounding tone, was something that she emphasized over and over, which has stuck with me to the present day, really. Yes, there were some things she did talk about technique, and I remember how she talked once about, sometimes fingers, when there's a keyboard, sometimes some piano students have fingers with that kind of crumble a little bit. And I just remember she referred to those as spaghetti fingers, so you try not to have spaghetti fingers. You have to keep certain things firm, and especially the upper fingers, because they're the weakest ones, right? For the fourth and the fifth. And I remember her also, in formulating octaves, how to play octaves. She would want you to have a kind of a round thing in your palm. She called it the O, or in her accent. My dear, please make it the O, and you kind of curved your fingers a little bit to produce that. Now, I found that after a while to be a little cramped for me, and that's okay, because you adapt to your own hand size and things like that. So eventually I kind of altered it a little bit, but I still kept that same shape in the palm, except I didn't have the fingers sort of curved and a little bit cramped for me. But I do remember her talking about that sort of things. There was she lived together with another student of hers. I remember this gal was from Canada, actually, who was kind of her companion housekeeper or whatever, in her apartment. And as I said earlier, you really had to be prepared. She never shouted or anything like that, but she could make a little sarcastic comment, about this or that. Any of the technical things that needed polishing, if you want to call it like that, was left to those assistants. So I would see her, like I say, maybe every 3 weeks or so. The practice rooms at Juilliard were there were a good many of them. Boy, the pianos were battered and worn there. So many grubby fingers had played them over the years. I remember the black keys. Some of them were actually a little bit smaller than they should be, because they had been so many fingers that probably worn them down. They were not soundproof, these rooms, at all very well. You could hear things through the walls, and we had a kind of little system there, the students, that if you were in a practice room and you want to remain, you want to claim it. We stuck a paper towel out of the door, so that if you're walking down the hall and you're looking for a practice room where you see this paper towel sticking out, well, that's occupied. Someone is using it. They may not be physically there at that moment, but that's their room. But of course, you know, if you knew somebody you knew was in a particular room, of course you'd open up, interrupt them, you know, you'd have a little chat and everything like that. But that's how we kind of dealt with the practice, But there was enough time to do that. There was enough time to do that sort of thing if you wanted to. But as I said, you had to deal with the rooms not very well soundproof, the pianos being worn. I think they were all Steinways there. I mean, Juilliard is an all Steinway school, just like the Dana School of Music here at Youngstown State now. You know, that's a kind of a special designation that every piano is either Steinway or, well, now in more recent times, Boston, because Boston is made by Steinway. So yes, there were older instruments worn, but perfectly usable. I ate in the cafeteria there, or at least lunch, and there was a group of us that we would go over to the Union Theological Seminary across the street, you know, for dinner. There was like a small group of us, and that was a regular thing for several years. Also, I remember my first year at Riverside Church, as I had mentioned, was just about a block down Claremont Avenue. There was a basketball court there, and I don't know how I got into this, but with a small group of guys, you used to go there and just kind of throw the basketball and play a little bit of, you know, just fun basketball there. And I remember that going on for my in my first year. I stayed with my aunt during the week, but I would go on weekends to the Port Authority bus terminal, take a bus and go back down to Thomas River to my hometown. So I did that for all those 5 full years that I was there, because that's as far as you could go. The highest thing you could get was a master's degree. Now let me tell you about these kinds of things that you would get from a school like Juilliard. A conservatory of music normally in the old days would award a diploma when you were finished. But as time went on and things got more competitive, and especially, you know, people who wanted to get on faculties at universities and so on, there were more and more demands were made. So a diploma became not enough, really. So conservatories started to add degrees now. Some of them actually became part of large universities. Others remain autonomous. So Juilliard's always been a separate thing. It's never been part of something else. But they began to offer degrees. So I was on a degree program. The only degree program was, yes, you could get a diploma at Juilliard when I was there, but I was on a degree program, and it was Bachelor of Science and Master of Science. And you might wonder, well, that's kind of odd. Why is it called Bachelor of Science, Master of Science? This is a music school. It should be Bachelor of Music and Master of Music. So yes, mostly. It had to do with the academic requirements, the non-music courses. So in addition to my music courses, I took also 2 academic subjects. One was from the social science area, you know, psychology course or some social science course. I took 2 years of German. I remember taking a Dante course in literature. And these were academic courses for the degree, which was nothing to do with your music courses. Nothing to do with the music courses. So that's what I went. Now, halfway through my Juilliard years, they introduced finally the Bachelor of Music, the BM, which you'd say that's the proper kind of bachelor's degree you should have in a music school, and which existed in virtually most of the music schools around the country. Well, I was already too far along, you know, to make the change. So I would have had only 1 academic subject to take in addition, not 2. But I was already too far along, so I just stayed with the Bachelor of Science. But that's why they're called. That's as far as you could go. The master, and then I went to a master's degree, and that was as far as you could go. So my degrees are Bachelor of Science and Master of Science. I have one on the wall right here, and I want you to take just a quick look at them. They're up top. It says Bachelor of Science. That's the undergraduate degree. And then here you have Master of Science. Like that. That's the way it was. Now, when they moved to Lincoln Center, then they added a doctorate program, a DMA, Doctor of Musical Arts, which is like a performer's doctorate. And, you know, so that existed. But that didn't exist at Juilliard in my time. The master's was as far as you could go. So from 1960, when I officially entered Juilliard, to 1965, that's when I was there as, you call it, a full-time student. and I got my master's in '65. So that was then the end of my affiliation with Juilliard. I must say I have nothing but the most pleasant memories of my time there. I just focused on my own things. I wasn't intimidated by some other student who might be more advanced or like that. But there are people like that. You know, you go to a music school or anything like that, and they may have fragile egos or something else. You know, they hear someone who's more advanced than they are, and they start losing confidence in themselves. And a school like Juilliard's not for you then. You have to have enough self-confidence in yourself. You have to work hard and just concentrate on your own progress, and don't worry about it. So none of that other stuff, you know, bothered me at all. I just went on, just did my own things. I got into the student council, you know, somewhere, I think it must have been in my third year, and I was kind of in charge of the movies that I bring in. We were showing films, you know, throughout the year. So I would go down to somewhere in Lower Manhattan and, you know, pick up these spools, you know, and bring them, rent these movies. And I remember one in particular that really gave a number of us a good laugh. It was a movie, it was like from the 1940s or something, and it's titled "I've Always Loved You." It was just a romantic movie in a kind of grand manner with this lady pianist who, she only seems to play only one piece, at least in the movie. You know, she's always playing the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto. You know, the one that main theme in the last movement was used in another movie of that same era with the words "Full Moon and Empty Arms." It's an instantly recognizable thing, and it kind of epitomizes what a romantic era piano concerto is all about. So in the movie, that's the only thing that you hear her play. Well, of course, later on, towards the end of the movie, the climactic scene, you know, when she's playing it with the orchestra, and as it comes to that grand climax, she looks through the piano and sees backstage her long-lost love, and he's standing there. So what she does is she just rises from the piano and walks to him. But the music keeps playing. You know, we lost a laugh. Actually, I ended up renting that movie twice. You know, because I thought it was so funny. Really was. But I was in charge of that as a member of the student council. The really kind of one of the main, maybe the main kind of prestigious thing within Juilliard was the to win the concerto competition. These would be held several times throughout the semester, and the way it was set up was that a particular concerto was chosen, and then the students who would compete for it, they all learned and played the same thing. So they weren't playing different things; they were working on that. Now, this was not just for pianists; the violinists had their, you know, there too. But it was several of these throughout the year, and you'd compete for that concerto, and it was a prestigious thing because then you played as soloist. Juilliard Orchestra. Well, I won that in my last year in 1965 with a piece by the very late turn of the 20th century composer Richard Strauss. No relation to Johann Strauss, the one who wrote those famous waltzes like the Blue Danube and so on. Richard Strauss, who's considered to be probably the main successor to Wagner as an opera composer and an orchestral composer. It's complex music, but this is an early work of his. Really, he only wrote very little for piano. It's called Burlesque. Burlesque in D minor. It was written about, I think, 1885 or something like that. It was more akin to the music of Brahms than the way he wrote later on. A nice, effective piece and everything. So I won the Juilliard competition with that piece, the Burlesque in D minor by Richard Strauss, and played it with the Juilliard Theater Orchestra. So that was a prestigious thing to do, so like I say, when I look back, I have nothing but the nicest memories of that. I should have mentioned when saying something about the way Juilliard started. And why is it called Juilliard? There was a French textile manufacturer named Auguste Juilliard who donated some money or something, so that's where the name came from. But remember, it's officially called the Juilliard School now, not the Juilliard School of Music, because you have that drama division. Some quite well-known actors, you know, in Hollywood and so on, have been graduates of that drama school. I remember another thing about with Rosina Lhevinne, Madame Lhevinne also. There were a couple of times that after my lesson at her apartment, she needed to go up to Juilliard. It was just a 1 block walk, but slightly uphill on Claremont Avenue. And she was a short lady, so she would take my arm, but we wouldn't walk straight up the sidewalk. She'd kind of zigzag side to side. It was a little bit easier for her. Remember, she was already in her mid-80s. I heard her play twice, actually, and she had small hands. She played very well. She played Mozart Concerto in C major, the K467, and the Chopin Concerto No. 1 in E minor. And she also played in Beethoven Cello Sonata with Leonard Rose, who was a very well-known cellist in New York at that time. So she came a little bit into her own as a performer in those latter years. When she was still married to her husband, they did piano duo performances sometimes. Remember, he died in 1944. So after that, she began bit by bit to come into her own a little bit as a performer. But she was really not, that wasn't her main focus. She was a teacher. She was an inspiration. She was really, she's the main influence on my own development, I think, as a pianist. I mean, I said earlier, that whole emphasis on how to produce a nice tone, deep into the keys. I talk about that all the time, when I do master classes here and there, try to do it myself, of course. So that was something which really sunk into me. And of course, taking all these other courses, the L&M courses, the literature material, the music history, the ensemble. Oh, I should say something about ensemble. Yes. Everyone goes to a music school. No matter what instrument you play, whether you're a singer, you're put into some ensemble to get that kind of experience. If you play an orchestral instrument, violin, flute, whatever, you'll go into one of the orchestras. If you're a singer, you go into the chorus. If you're a pianist, you usually go into the chorus also, because there are very few pianists who would play an orchestral instrument well enough to be put into an orchestra. So I was put into the Juilliard chorus for 2 years, and in one of those 2 years, I believe it was 1962, the Juilliard Chorus participated in the official opening of Lincoln Center of the Performing Arts, that big art complex. There was only one part of it that was open, one unit, and that was Philharmonic Hall. I think it's called Avery Fisher Hall. It was renamed Avery Fisher Hall later on. I remember, or was told, wasn't even 100% complete yet, but they had to go through the dedication. It was a big gala concert. Leonard Bernstein conducted. There was a blue ribbon audience there. Jacqueline Kennedy was in the audience, I was told, and other luminaries. And I was part of this concert that officially opened Lincoln Center, That's the first time that I heard that very beautiful work by the English composer Ralph Vaughan Williams called A Serenade to Music. It was in that program. We did a movement of a Mahler symphony, the chorus I'm talking about. And Aaron Copland, the famous American composer, had a world premiere of a work of his that actually caused people to really raise their eyebrows. They'd never heard anything like this by Aaron Copland. It was called Connotations, a piece written in what you call the 12-tone style, a very highly dissonant style that had been originally invented by the Austrian composer Arnold Schoenberg, but influenced a lot of composers. But it's a highly dissonant music. It was totally different from the kind of music that people associated Aaron Copland with. Hey, but that's neither here nor there. Composer can go any which way. You want to try something new, do it. The test of time is the final arbiter. But people were quite taken aback by hearing this piece. Well, here we are, 60 plus years later, and Connotations hasn't really survived, it has kind of semi-disappeared from the repertoire. Only very rarely is it played. People still prefer to hear those much better known works like, Rodeo, Billy the Kid, Appalachian Spring, El Salon Mexico, and such. Right? But composer can try anything. But I remember that was premiered on that. And the next night there was a concert, and another American pianist, also graduate of Juilliard, one of Van Cliburn's contemporaries, his name is John Browning. He premiered a very fine piano concerto by another very well-known American composer, Samuel Barber, his piano concerto. and it got its world premiere the next night. I think Van Cliburn played the night after that. The Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto, which was one of his signature pieces that he had won with in Moscow. So, anyways, that was my association with the Juilliard chorus. But I was in it because I had to have an ensemble. I had to do something within an ensemble, as all the other pianists did, and so I had that experience as well. Just trying to think of some other little points here and there. I think I've covered the main points of things there. But again, just to summarize, I just concentrated on my own progress, my own practicing. I had my lessons with Madame Lhevinne and Janine Dowis, the assistant that I worked with. I was there during the week. I stayed with my aunt. I went back to Thomas River on weekends. Did that for 5 years. And that's my main influence as a musician or as a pianist comes from my time at Juilliard. So I have nothing but the nicest memories, about it. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about all that. Following this, you're going to hear it's on a little separate video, a lovely prelude of Rachmaninoff, which I play right here on my piano at home, actually just before doing this talk here. So there we are, and I'm sure I'll probably remember something else and maybe mention at another time about my years there at Juilliard. But they were very important for me. They were very formative, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to be there and to work with Rosina Lhevinne. There we are. So.